All right, so we're in this incredible series on the book of Daniel called The Influencers. And we've said every week, this is week 3, we've said every week that this whole idea of influence has grown exponentially in the last decade. That with social media and the capacity of that, the capacity to have influence, there's never been a greater opportunity than there is now. And we've been looking at this Old Testament character, Daniel, who finds himself in a really, really difficult situation. He's growing up in Judah, and all of a sudden, this powerful king, this powerful nation, Babylon, comes in and overtakes his land. And not only that, they take Daniel as probably about a 16-year-old. They take him and 3 of his friends away from his family into this new culture, into this new city, this new nation. And they're going to indoctrinate them into the customs and the culture of Babylon. And Daniel and his 3 friends find themselves in this really, really challenging position to not conform to the culture around them. And we're finding out that there are some things in Daniel's life, there's some things that Daniel possessed that allowed him, even in the midst of a hostile culture, even in the midst of a culture that really was not interested in his God. They weren't interested in his faith. They were doing well. Babylon was prospering. They were powerful. They had riches. They had beauty. They weren't interested in Daniel's God. But yet we're seeing that Daniel possessed some things that allowed him in that kind of climate, in that kind of context, allowed him to live this incredibly influential life. That 4 kings in the book of Daniel all converted and confessed the God of Daniel. And that we've been asking this question here at Renovate of, in the context in which we find ourselves, whether that's at the University of Texas, or that's at Conley High School, or Rouse High School, or Cedar Park High School, or in the business community, or at Vandegrift High School, or in your workplace, in the tech industry, wherever you find yourself, we're kind of asking the question, how do we live lives that we actually draw people closer to Christ and not push them away? Daniel is a great, great example and model of how we can do that. And we said this, that what we're beginning to see in Daniel's life, the very first thing that we saw in week 1 was that Daniel had his core identity established. He knew who he was. He wasn't looking for the culture to affirm him. He wasn't looking for the culture to define him. He already had his security. He already knew who he was and knew who God was. That he didn't fall prey to that. The Babylonians, actually, we saw in chapter 1, tried to redefine Daniel by giving him a new name. It's like, no. Your name, which has real significance to you, we're going to change it. We're going to give you a Babylonian name, Belteshazzar, which means Prince of the Demons. And we're going to uproot you from your heritage and your culture and your belief system. No. We're going to redefine you. Daniel, he had his core established. Then we said that he was committed to not compromising no matter what the cost. That he was willing to live a life of integrity, even in the midst of the culture that he found himself. And then last week we looked and said that two other things Daniel possessed was he had an authentic connection with a living God. A God who directed him, a God who spoke to him, this living God. And that gave Daniel confidence even in really difficult situations. This morning, we're going to look at Daniel chapter 3, which is a pretty famous chapter in the Bible. Even in kids' ministry, we've all heard the story of the three friends who were thrown into the fiery furnace. But we're going to look at something that we can pull out of this story that can allow us to live lives of influence, and it's this one word: courage. That Daniel and his three friends lived courageously. Courageously. We're going to see it in the text this morning. Now listen, I'm going to make, light a little bit, but I was thinking this week as I was preparing for the message, because, guys, there's courage everywhere. I mean, Harry Potter had courage. Come on, he did. Right? Like, we can see courage like everywhere in the movies that we see. Half the movies that come out, you're finding a courageous character. We went to watch a movie a couple of days ago, me, Brett, and Trey, and the previews for Harriet Tubman came out. This movie that's coming out about the courage that she had to escape slavery, but then when she got her freedom, to go back. So courage is something that we see, and it's all around us and all this. And I was thinking this week, and there was like 100 different choices I put into my Google search, like movies that display courage, and the list is like forever. I mean, Braveheart, Gladiator, right? And then I landed on a movie that was very odd. The first time I watched it, I thought that might be one of the worst movies I've ever seen. The second time I watched it, I was like, still bad. Third time I watched it, I'm like, okay, I'm warming up to this. Fourth time I watched it, I cried. And it's Napoleon Dynamite. Come on. And I watched the scene. I went to the scene where Pedro comes out in front of his whole school. He's running for president of his student body, and he comes out and he kind of just mumbles through some things, and he says at the end, that all your wildest dreams will come true if you vote for me, right? And all of a sudden, Napoleon comes out. Come on, in front of the whole student body, and he puts his mixtape in, and he starts to dance. And I thought, that's courage. In front of the whole school, and the popular kid and the girl who everybody thought was going to win, he kind of is like, right? And he gets done, and everybody goes crazy. And Pedro wins. Come on. Courage. Napoleon had courage. I wouldn't have done that when I was 16, 17 years old. No way. So here's the thing. Man, courage is everywhere around us. There's all different types of courage. There's courage of character, courage of deeds, courage for the gospel. There's courage in choices. I thought this week, and I was like, man, courage, it comes in all forms. The student who courageously stands up for another student at school who's being picked on or excluded is living courageously. The student who, despite their fears and anxieties, takes a risk to pursue a passion Even when nobody around them believes in them or mocks them or ridicules them, they're living courageously. The person who goes through a difficult experience in life, but nevertheless chooses to get back up and not allow it to wreck their life, is living courageously. The mother who doesn't know where she's going to get the energy or how she's going to survive or where the finances are come from, but nevertheless gets up every day and serves her children, is living courageously. The father who's overwhelmed with his responsibility and everything in him is telling him to run, but he stays, is living courageously. The Muslim man or woman who decides to trust and follow Jesus despite their entire family disowning and rejecting them, maybe even at the cost of their life, is living courageously. Courageous choices, courageous deeds, courageous witness. Here's the thing. Ralph Waldo Emerson said this: whatever you do, you need courage. Whatever course you decide upon, there's always someone to tell you that you're wrong. There's always difficulties arising that tempt you to believe your critics are right. To map out a course of action and follow it to an end requires some of the same courage that a soldier needs. That's Ralph Waldo Emerson. Mary Ann Radmacher said this: courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the little voice at the end of the day that says, I'll try again tomorrow. We think in terms of, and we're going to look at a story today that's big. It's big. But most of the time, courage is in the small. It's in the small things. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Daniel 3. We're going to read this story, and we're going to look at the courage of 3 young men in a very difficult situation. Starting in verse 1, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. It's about 90 feet by 9. That's a big old statue. It's like in the movie Shrek, you know, when he walked into the kingdom and he was like, oh, I think he's overcompensating for something. Lord Farquaad. That was just a throw-in. Keeping you here. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Look, he called everyone out. This is everyone. He's making a point. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Another famous author said this: the opposite of courage is conformity. This is what's happening here. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. Weird statement. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music. I'm getting tired of those words. We get it. Must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I've set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither," there they are again, "lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you're ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. Conform. Conform. Your majesty," let me read it again. "But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what good God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, they're like teenagers. "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Man, that's bold. That's bold. They're standing up at the cost of their life. Like, most of the time, I don't want to stand up just for inconvenience. Like, very rarely have I ever felt really, really threatened that my life is on the line. But pressure comes in different ways today. So let's keep reading. "Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He jumped up. Like, one of the only other times I see kind of this kind of responses in the New Testament, when Stephen, in Acts 8, I believe, or Acts 7, is preaching so boldly. He ends up giving his life as a martyr. He ends up getting martyred for preaching the gospel. And it says in Scripture, he was preaching so powerfully that Jesus stood up at the right hand of the Father. Like, I don't know if I've ever done anything that had Jesus standing up. But Nebuchadnezzar stands up. Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, again, because we saw it in the last chapter, God is doing something as a witness to those around Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their courage is something's going to happen when they stand courageously. Something changes. Nebuchadnezzar in the last chapter was like, when God answered Daniel through the vision and the interpretation, he was like, there is a God. There is a God. Look at what he says. Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. Many people believe that it was Christ in the fiery furnace with them. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, a little extreme, and their houses be turned, wouldn't have been mine, piles of rubble. No other God can save in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Courage. They had courage. We said courage comes in many different types of forms. But courage is a consistent mark of followers of Jesus throughout the Bible and history. All the way through the Bible, there's something that marks the people of God with this courage. Look at what Scripture says. I Googled this week, Scriptures on courage, and hundreds of them came up. Psalm 27, Psalm 54, Psalm 56, all these different things, and I just picked 3. Look at what Deuteronomy 31:6 says. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, your enemies. For it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. 1 Corinthians 16:13. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong or courageous. 1 Chronicles 28:20. David is talking to Solomon. David said to Solomon, his son, be strong and courageous and do it. Do not be afraid and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God, even my God, is with you. He will not leave you or forsake you until all the work for the service of the house of the Lord is finished. Courage is something that marks the people of God, and we're going to look at why in a minute. But I want you to think in your life about people you have seen that have lived courageously around you and how it challenged you and marked your life. See, for me, in November of 1991, I walked into the Houston Summit in Houston, Texas, to sign my contract with the Houston Rockets. I'd held out for a week of training camp as we did contract negotiations. I walked out. That night, we were playing our first exhibition game against the Philadelphia 76ers with Charles Barkley. I remember I walked into the tunnel of the Houston Summit, and the 76ers were practicing on the floor, and they had Manute Bol, who was 7'7", and Charles Barkley, and all these guys that I'd grown up watching, and I felt like I was in Space Jam. I really did. I was like, because Manute Bol said, honest to gosh, I thought, these are the Monstars. Here we are. And they got done, and we had a practice. And we were doing a practice, and the first play, we were doing a walkthrough, and this player on the Rockets, David Wood, who was 6'9". He came cutting down the lane, and I threw a forearm shiver into him. Stood him up. He was like, oh, nice. Went back. We ran the play again. He cuts down the lane again. I go to give him a forearm shiver. He gives me a forearm shiver to the jaw. It was like, rookie. I was like, oh, okay. Here we go. So we practice. We go into the weight room afterwards. And we're lifting weights together. We have an exhibition game that night. And he says to me, hey, man, where are you at with Jesus? What? The weight room? Yeah, where are you at with Jesus, man? David Wood was the first person that I saw that he lived courageously. He was courageous as a player. He was courageous as a follower of Jesus. And I saw something different in his life that I wanted. I saw when we went on the road and we were staying in Phoenix and everybody else was going, I saw how he lived his life when nobody was watching. I saw how he witnessed not in a weird way or beat you over the head with the Bible, but in a very real way to all the teammates around him. And he was the guy who ultimately challenged me and helped lead me to Christ in June of 1991. I saw something different in his life. I saw courage. Courage. Here's the thing, man. Courage is a consistent mark of followers of Jesus. But here's the thing, man. Where can we get courage from? And the reality is that God is the one who can infuse us with courage. Come on. Jesus was in the fire with them. Come on. Have you ever had that person in your life that when they're there with you, you can do anything? You can be bold. Listen, I used to drive to the games and anxiety would be trying to overtake me. Because as a professional athlete, guess what? There's a lot of expectation. And I'd be driving. I remember we were playing the Detroit Pistons. I was driving to the game down whatever road that was to Kirby Lane. And we're not Kirby Lane, the cafe, the actual Kirby Lane in Houston. KI, not KE. We're driving down and this anxiety was overwhelming me. I almost didn't even want to go to the game. And I remember praying in the car and going, God, I need your strength. I need your grace. I need your ability. And guess what happened? Courage and boldness and strength infused me. Now we still lost. But I had the courage and the strength to be able to go. Listen, God can infuse you with courage. No matter what you're going through, infuse you as courage in your job, infuse you in courage as a mom, infuse you in courage as a dad, infuse you in courage as a student. God can give you courage. Listen, the Apostle Paul, who went through one of the most difficult journeys when you look at it. I mean, he says at one point, man, I'm despairing of life. I'm hard pressed on every side, right? I'm persecuted but not abandoned, struck down but not destroyed, right? He's going through all this stuff. He's like, hey, I know that persecution awaits me in every place that I go. But when you read the book of Acts, at every juncture, Paul is getting ready to quit. Red letters appear. Paul, I'm with you. Paul, let me strengthen you. Paul, go for it. Come on. God God can infuse us with, I need courage. Come on. I needed courage just to do the dishes the other day. They were this high. God, give me courage to get up every day to do what you've called me to do. God can infuse us. He infused Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego with courage. And here's the thing, the last thing I want to leave you with is receive courage, yes. Ask for courage. Ask for God to strengthen you. Ask for God to give you His grace. But here's the thing, is that courage inspires others. Come on. When we see somebody do something, when I see a student and I'll watch a video and I'll see a student stand up for another student who's being picked on or ostracized, or right? Like it encourages something in me because courage inspires other people. When we read the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they made a courageous decision. Why? Because God had infused them with courage, and as they made that decision, it impacted and inspired Nebuchadnezzar and those around him. This world. Listen, years ago, I was just coming into ministry and I read a quote and it stuck with me ever since. It said this: the world is never moved by the mildly interested. They're moved by passion. They're moved by faith. They're moved by courage. And here's my exhortation for us this morning. Allow the Spirit of God to infuse you with courage. Yes, courage in your circumstances, but courage to stand for Him. Come on. That's what marked all the followers at every juncture in Acts. You see this. It's like Peter and John standing boldly, praying for boldness, speaking the word boldly, right? There was something that marked them of courage and courageousness for their faith. Because here's the thing, most of the time, the fear of the unknown keeps us from stepping out courageously. You see it in the story. But they said, hey, we might die. God might not rescue you. We don't care. They didn't allow the fear of the unknown to keep them from stepping out and doing what God had called them. Let God ask. God, I need courage. God, I need strength. God, I need boldness. And as you step in, it's like in the movie, and I'm sorry, this wasn't in my notes, but it's like in the movie Yes Man. He's sitting there and he's living this whole life of calculated risk and not wanting to try anything and do anything. And all of a sudden, he's in this convention and this guy comes running down and challenges him. Hey, you got to say yes to everything. But he comes and he's having a conversation with his friend, and he was like, I'm brokenhearted because my fiance left me. And he said to him, you know why she left you? Because it's really hard to be with somebody who doesn't even want to live their own life. And it's like, you're right. Like, I need to get out of this. Ask God. God, give me courage. Infuse me with courage. And when you do, watch the impact that it makes on the people around you. When you're not afraid to live your life and your dream, it impacts others. Because most everybody just wants to, I don't want to stand out. I don't want to be different. I don't want to ruffle the waves. Da, 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 da. World's never changed that way. It's not. Let God infuse you. Ask him. And then watch what he does when you live courageously.